welcome to this week's video. Now in this week's video I'm going to do a very quick history of the Fender Telecaster. Now if you've watched my videos recently you'll know that I've been doing a show called The Guitar Through Time, where I play all the different types of guitars, you know, the sort of main types like these ones hanging up here and this one and the Strat over there, and play the sort of songs that are well known for being played on these guitars by the players that are well known for playing these guitars. And I went through like from the 50s, stopped at about the 80s, go into that some other time why I stopped at the 80s. Anyway, while I was doing it I thought this is actually pretty interesting, so what I've done, I've picked the bits that really interest me about the history of these guitars. I'm going to start with the Telecaster because that's kind of where it all started, and what I'm going to do before I get into the history of that, I'm going to show you a little clip from the show that I recently did called The Guitar Through Time. You can check it out on my website www.imtjwalker.com if you want to have a look at some more clips. And this is a little bit of a solo from Mystery Train, the Elvis tune, kind of done a bit like the Danny Gatton version on his Sun medley. So check this out first. So the reason I'm starting with the Telecaster, and I started the show with the Telecaster, is because really the Telecaster was the first solid-bodied electric guitar to be in sort of mass production. So in 1949, Leo Fender and George Fullerton in their Southern Californian workshop came up with this sort of revolutionary idea for a solid-bodied electric guitar, and this was called an Esquire. It had the kind of single bridge and pickup thing, and they had a kind of cover on it as well. But these very early ones didn't even have a truss rod. They didn't have any sort of mechanism in the neck to counteract the pull of the strings. So that was the first kind of thing. That was the prototype. But it was revolutionary because it was the kind of first guitar that was completely solid. They were already electrified guitars, but they were all sort of semi-acoustics that had a pickup on, and they had all kinds of problems with feedback and stuff. So this was really a sort of clever thinking idea. Let's not have any kind of acoustic sound coming from the guitar. It's all going to be from the electronics that you can hear it. So the prototype, the Esquire, this first guitar, it came out 1950, they brought it out, but very quickly on its tail they came up with another one called the Broadcaster, which was basically much more like the Telecaster because it had two pickups and it had a truss rod in. Now this was interesting, I thought. George Fullerton, who was working with Leo Fender, his dad, Fred Fullerton, invented a truss rod, and it basically works on the same principle that the ones that are used on the guitars today. This wasn't the first guitar to have a truss rod installed. That was from about 1922, this Gibson, the L5. This was the first guitar not to have a truss rod, but first one documented to have an adjustable truss rod. But that truss rod worked in a very different way. This truss rod that was put into the original Broadcaster was rear mounted, so that's why on all Telecasters and Fenders with a maple fingerboard, they were all put in through the rear and then had this bit of walnut put into the back of the neck, so you get this kind of skunk stripe. Now the Broadcaster only lasted a couple of years because Gretsch, who are now actually owned by Fender, they had a drum kit out called a Broadcaster, so they issued some kind of trademark dispute. So Fender had to stop calling the guitar a Broadcaster, and for a short period, about 1951 to 52 I think it was, they brought out essentially a Telecaster with the two pickups, but it didn't have Telecaster written on the headstock, and those became known, and then now you can get like the custom shop ones, they're called no-casters because they haven't got anything written on. So then by about mid-1951, that's when the first Telecasters came out. And as I say, they had the 2 pickups, they then had the truss rod, they had Telecaster written on there. And apparently the name Telecaster was influenced by this newfangled gadget called the television. I think it's very difficult to look at these guitar designs now without kind of being influenced by how iconic and what bit of history they are. I mean, I think, despite the fact that they're ultimately completely functional, everything about them, then they're made, every part of them is made for practicality rather than what they look like. But I just think there's something amazing, aesthetically pleasing about these guitars. The Strat even more so. I kind of waver between which one I prefer, the Telecaster or the Strat, but I think the Strat has to be an absolute iconic design masterpiece. I think it's both of them, the whole sort of proportions of them, somehow I think they got them absolutely right. And in some ways you can't really argue with that because it hasn't changed. If they were wrong, they would have gradually changed shape, but they haven't. They're still the same shape as they were back then. Now, Fender had been making Hawaiian-style lap steel guitars since about 1945, and a lot of the original, those bits that were on those lap steels came over to the Telecaster. So these kind of knurled knobs, I guess you call them, with these rough bits, they were on the lap steel. The lap steel also had a pickup and bridge kind of system like this, all built into one, so that was a sort of hangover from that. And then even this, having all the tuning pegs on one side, even I think one of the early prototypes of the Squire had the sort of standard 3 on each side, but Leo Fender saw these on, there was a couple of different influences, one of them being some sort of 19th century folk guitar, and he saw these and he put them all down one side, which, you know, at the time was another revolutionary idea. And they also came with this kind of cover on these. I've got one somewhere and I couldn't place my hand on it to put it on this guitar. This is, well, we'll go into what this one is in a minute. It's a custom shop Danny Gatton one, but yeah, they came with this kind of cover on the top. There's a photo with one with the original cover on. Now this is the bit I found really fascinating, and I didn't talk about this in my show because I only found this out while I was looking into it for this video. But the selector switch, which I always thought was a fairly obvious way of it working, had always been like this on a Telecaster. Well, a more common story about how the switch evolved on the Stratocaster, I think, which probably a lot of people know, is that originally had a 3-way switch which switched each of the 3 pickups on the Stratocaster on in turn. So you'd have at the top for that pickup, in the middle for that one, there for that one. And people discovered if they kind of put it in between, just left it there, it didn't click into place, but they put it in between, you got that nice sort of outer phasey sound, which I always think the classic sound is that kind of sometimes a swing, kind of clucky sound that you get in between. But the switch on the Telecaster, or all the controls on the Telecaster, what became the Telecaster, is even more interesting. Now, when it first started on the Broadcaster, if you had the switch there, which is now the bridge pickup selection, you had both pickups switched on, but this, which is the volume knob, that was always the master volume knob, but the other knob on the original one, when you had it switched onto that position, which is now the bridge pickup, it activated both pickups. But this knob here, instead of being tone, that brought in as much of the neck pickup as you wanted to blend in with the bridge pickup. That was the original design. If you then put it in the middle position, that was the neck pickup only in its natural position, and they had that kind of chrome thing on to reduce the capacitance. And then if you pushed it into what's now the neck pickup position, you got a kind of bassy sound. I don't know if it's because people used it as a bass instrument then, but you got a kind of rolled off bassier boosted sound on the front pickup. So that was a very strange setup. So bassy sound in the middle, that with its kind of normal sound, and then over here for both pickups, and then blend that one back in. Then in 1952 it changed, but not to the modern setup, the one that we're all familiar with. It changed to having the switch there for the bridge pickup, but with the tone control as it is now. So you had just that pickup in that position with a tone control and volume control like we do now. Middle position, just that pickup on its own, again with the tone control working and the volume knob, master volume as per usual. The front position was this one, but still retaining that extra capacitance bassier sound with the tone control disabled. And it stayed like that until the late 60s, can you believe? So all Telecasters prior to that point had this strange setup. But what people did discover, the same as the Strat, was that they would prop the pickup selector between that middle position and the bridge position, so they could get that both pickups working together and get that kind of out of phasey sound, same way as they did on the Strat. So there we are. That's what I think is the really sort of fascinating bit about the beginning of the Telecaster. So now I'm going to look at a few sort of the classic Telecaster players and some of the sort of mods they did on their guitar. And I may as well start on this one because Danny Gatton, who obviously wasn't one of the earlier Telecaster players, but he was he's kind of considered to be one of the real brilliant Telecaster players these days, and to the point where Fender brought out the custom shop Danny Gatton model Telecaster, which is what this is. Now, I've had this guitar probably getting on for 20 years, and the modifications he had on his, the most obvious one being these pickups. These are Joe Barden pickups, and they're actually kind of underwound humbuckers, which I only really kind of found out recently. I mean, I know they've got two rails on it, should have been obvious really, but they are actually humbuckers, although they do sound like single coils. It does make this guitar incredibly versatile. I still, if I had to grab one guitar for a gig where I'm playing lots of different styles, I'll probably still go for the Telecaster, which is weird, isn't it, as it's the kind of first production guitar. And also I ought to mention, as I said this in my show, the Gretsch that I played as well, which is the Chet Atkins one, or the one like Brian Setzer played. When they came out in the early 50s, I think they came out about 54, after this anyway, they were double the price of the Telecaster at the time. So some of the other mods on this Danny Gatton Telecaster, this switch is very, very loose. On a standard Telecaster, it kind of clicks into place. This is really loose, which is the way that Danny Gatton liked his. There's also a bit missing, you might be able to see it here, there's a bit missing off the bridge that he used to file off so he didn't get his hand caught on it. And also, along the side here, I like this, there's cubic zirconium. He drilled out the black markers and put in cubic zirconium because he reckoned he could see them better under the light, which is useful because I've actually had to, I thought when I first read that when I was kind of in my 20s when I got this guitar, or early 30s, whenever it was, I thought, what am I talking about? How can you not see the fret markers on the guitar? Since my eyes have got worse and now I wear glasses all the time, I've had to put stickers on some of my guitars that have got very small fret markers because I kept going whoop and playing the wrong notes. So I get it now why Danny Gatton did that. So there we go, that's the Danny Gatton Telecaster with the mods that he used. I've actually got 3 Telecaster style guitars, only 2 Fenders. And this is the other one because I play with an Elvis tribute. I bought this one years ago because I didn't want to fly with my expensive custom shop one. And at the time these weren't very expensive, they've got very expensive now. But this is the copy of the James Burton one that he used when he played with Elvis. And it was basically a standard 1969 Telecaster, and he got this amazing kind of wallpaper finish. Fender brought them out, they brought out one of these with a blue flower one as well. But it was essentially just a basic 69 Telecaster with this brilliant pattern on. He thought it might be a bit over the top, but of course Elvis didn't think so, and it went very well with the Vegas show. And this has got the more traditional chrome covered pickup here, slightly different knurled knobs, and as I say, there you go, you can see the switch that isn't as loose as it is on the Danny Gatton one. Now the only other Telecaster style guitar I've got is this James Tyler Mongoose. This is the Dan Huff model, and it's sort of a Telecaster. It's got the kind of Telecaster type bridge, it's got a Telecaster pickup, but it's got a humbucker here. And I'm going to talk about some of the other heavily modded Telecasters that are quite famous. I'm not doing these in any chronological order particularly. So Andy Summers from The Police, he had quite a heavily modded Telecaster that he was famous for. So his was a 61 Telecaster, although it had a maple neck, which the 61s didn't have. So it was either a custom order or it had a 50s neck on it from an earlier one. On his, he'd replaced the front pickup with a sort of standard Les Paul type pickup, and he also had a little phase switch so he could have the 2 pickups out of phase, and he had an alembic preamp put into his, so that was a different sort of take he had on his. That was that modded sound, and of course he kind of defined that 80s sound with all the chorus, and that was all done on a Telecaster, which was, even the technology even then was 30 years old. Another famous one, George Harrison, and a lot of the later Beatles stuff he played Telecasters, and the famous performance on the roof of the Apple building, that was on a Rosewood Telecaster. And of course we can't go by without mentioning Keith Richards with his guitar that was apparently given to him by Eric Clapton in the early 70s, and he called this one Macawba after someone in, I think it was it's a Dickens character. Is it from Great Expectations? I can't remember which one it's from. And he famously removes the bottom E string and tunes it to an open tuning. And again, he's replaced the front pickup with a humbucker as well. And like several of these other players, they've replaced the sort of 3 saddle bridge for a 6 saddle bridge eventually. Not straight away, but they've eventually done that, and particularly in the case of his, then he can remove one of the saddles because he doesn't have that bottom string on. Of course, this is no way an exhaustive list of all Telecaster players, but these are just the sort of ones that I particularly like and some of the tunes that I did in my show. Jeff Beck, although he's more latterly famous for the Strat, and early on he used a Les Paul, but when he did Blow by Blow, and Because We've Ended as Lovers, which I did in the show, he played that on a very heavily modified Telecaster. I originally read, here's a tip, don't use ChatGPT to look these things up. I was using ChatGPT and it gave me all completely wrong information, so I then had to go in and look on the proper sources, mainly the Fender website, to find out a lot of these things, not necessarily on this one. So the Telecaster that Jeff Beck used on Blow by Blow, it was heavily modified, and it was done by Seymour Duncan. It was probably from a kind of 60s Telecaster that he'd found from somewhere, and he then basically, if you look at it on this picture here, it's got a sort of Les Paul style tailpiece and bridge and 2 Les Paul type pickups. And one of the other Telecasters, I think I mentioned this one's the last one, Bruce Springsteen. It's actually an Esquire body and a Telecaster neck. When he bought it, it had 4 pickups in, which you can kind of see on the Born to Run cover. And it was bought off a session guitarist who, so he could get paid 4 times the amount, he had 4 pickups installed in it and 4 outputs, so he could play the same solo going through 4 different amps and charge the people for 4 separate sessions for playing one thing at a time. And anyway, this guitar has been sort of fiddled with since Bruce Springsteen's had it, but it's the kind of one guitar he's used all the way through his career. He had to retire from using it live in about 95, but yeah, this was an early 50s Esquire body with a Telecaster neck, and this is probably one of the most iconic Telecasters of all time, and I've recently become a bit obsessed with Bruce Springsteen from not really being interested for many years. So there we go, there's my little potted history of the Telecaster. I hope that was interesting. I'm going to leave you with another track. This was a rehearsal for our show. This was another bit of Telecastering on another Elvis-y track. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit like, hit subscribe. I bring out new videos 7 PM UK time every Friday, so I hope to see you next week. Well, that's alright. That's alright. Well, that's alright, my mama.